The bank was busy, customers moving in and out, tellers handling transactions like any other day. Then he walked in, just a man with a check, nothing unusual, but within minutes everything changed. The teller's smile faded, the glances started. Security stepped closer, whispers behind the counter. Doubt before proof, suspicion before facts. Then came the final blow. "Sir, we can't cash this check." He stayed calm, collected, watching, because what they didn't know, they had just denied the CEO of the very bank they worked for. And now, they were about to learn exactly who they had messed with. Before we start the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe for more. The city moved fast, but inside the Grand Bank building, time seemed to slow down. The floors gleamed under the bright ceiling lights, polished to perfection. The scent of fresh coffee mixed with the faint, expensive perfume of customers waiting in line. Behind the counters, tellers worked with quick efficiency, flashing practiced smiles at well-dressed clients. Everything about the place spoke of power, wealth, and exclusivity. Noah Carter stepped inside unnoticed at first. He wasn't wearing a tailored suit or designer shoes. Instead, he had on a simple sweater, dark jeans, and comfortable shoes. His jacket was slightly worn, nothing flashy. He didn't look like the usual high-profile client who banked here, but that didn't bother him. He knew exactly who he was. He walked with calm confidence, holding a check in his hand, waiting for his turn like everyone else. It didn't take long for the shift in energy. The moment he stepped forward in line, the air around him changed. It wasn't loud, but it was there. The quick glance from the security guard near the entrance. The way a teller whispered something to her coworker before looking in his direction. The slight pause of the woman at the counter when she saw him standing next. No one noticed it all. He had seen this reaction too many times before. He stepped up to the counter, placing the check down carefully. Across from him, the teller, Angela Whitmore, an older woman with a stiff expression, barely glanced at it before her lips pressed together in disapproval. Her name tag gleamed under the lights, but her eyes held none of the warmth her customer service badge suggested. She picked up the check with 2 fingers, as if it carried something she didn't want to touch. "Where did you get this?" Angela asked, her tone sharp, her brows pinching together. Noah kept his face neutral. "It's my check. I'd like to deposit it." Angela's eyes flickered to the numbers on the paper. The amount was large, but not out of place for a bank of this size. Yet something in her posture changed. She shifted slightly in her chair, cleared her throat, and forced a tight smile. "I'll need to see some identification," she said. Noah didn't hesitate. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his driver's license, and handed it over. Angela took it, but barely glanced at it before shaking her head. "I'll need more than this." His grip tightened on the edge of the counter, but his voice stayed calm. "More than this? You didn't ask the man before me for anything extra." Angela's forced smile didn't waver, but her fingers tapped against the counter. "Sir, large transactions like this require additional verification." Noah exhaled slowly. He had the patience of a man who had dealt with these situations before, but it didn't mean it sat well with him. "It's a payroll check. From this bank," he pointed out. "The account is with you. You can verify it." Angela's lips twitched, but her polite act was slipping. She turned slightly and motioned to the security guard near the entrance. He moved forward, his heavy boots thudding against the marble floor. "Is there a problem?" the guard, Tom Wilkins, asked, standing a little too close. Angela folded her arms. "This check looks questionable," she said. Noah's jaw tightened just slightly. "Questionable how?" Angela pursed her lips, glancing at Tom as if expecting him to step in. "It doesn't look like it belongs to you." Silence stretched between them, thick and charged. Noah studied her face, the way she gripped the check tighter than necessary, the way she refused to meet his eyes for more than a second. He had been through this before, too many times. He had given her no reason to doubt him, except one. He didn't look like the type of man she expected to hold a check this big. He could have explained himself. He could have told her that his name was printed on that check, the same name on his ID, the same name linked to the account she had direct access to. But he knew it wouldn't change anything. She had already made up her mind. Angela sighed heavily, turning the check over in her hands as if searching for a reason to deny it. "I'm going to have to speak to my manager," she said, her tone laced with something final, as if the decision had already been made. Tom didn't move from his position. Angela didn't hand back his ID. And Noah? He simply slid his hands into his pockets and watched. Because what they didn't know, what none of them had even considered, was that they were speaking to the man who ran this bank. Angela turned sharply, gripping the check in one hand while adjusting her blazer with the other. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she disappeared through the glass door leading to the manager's office. Noah didn't move. He had nothing to prove, and certainly nothing to fear, but he knew exactly what was happening behind that door. Inside the office, Stephen Holloway, the bank manager, sat at his polished wooden desk, reviewing paperwork. He was in his mid-50s, with neatly combed silver hair and the sharp, impatient look of a man who believed he was always right. Angela placed the check in front of him without a word. Stephen glanced at the amount, then at Angela. "What's the issue?" Angela lowered her voice as if sharing classified information. "A man just came in trying to cash it. He doesn't look like he should be holding a check this size." Stephen leaned back in his chair, raising an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" Angela hesitated but then pressed forward. "It's suspicious. He didn't come in dressed like our usual high-value clients. And he's, you know." Stephen understood exactly what she was implying. He exhaled sharply and picked up the check again. "Whose signature is on it?" Angela's lips pursed. "It's from our payroll account." Stephen frowned, flipping it over. He checked the signature line. His own name was printed neatly in ink. His shoulders stiffened. "Who did you say this man was?" Angela sighed as if the name itself was ridiculous. "Noah Carter." Stephen blinked. A strange silence filled the space between them. He straightened slightly in his chair, the realization settling in. The name wasn't just familiar, it was his boss's name. Angela noticed the sudden shift in his face. "Sir?" Stephen swallowed, his fingers tightening around the check. "Where is he now?" Angela shrugged. "Still waiting at the counter. Security is keeping an eye on him." Stephen shut his eyes for a second and took a slow breath. He felt a weight settle in his chest, a cold, creeping weight of realization. He had two choices. He could walk out there and do what should have been done the moment Noah presented his check. Process it professionally, apologize for the delay, and pretend none of this ever happened. Or he could let this escalate into something much worse. His ego chose the second option. He stood, adjusting his tie. "Let's go see about this suspicious check ourselves." Angela smiled, satisfied that she had done the right thing. She turned and followed Stephen out of the office. Back in the main lobby, Noah remained exactly where he had been, his hands resting in his pockets, watching the room carefully. He didn't need to check his watch to know how long this was taking. The same security guard, Tom, stood by the door, pretending to be casual but still monitoring him closely. Then Stephen stepped forward, Angela right behind him. Stephen's face was unreadable, but Noah didn't miss the flicker of hesitation in his eyes. Stephen stopped in front of the counter and placed the check down slowly. "You're trying to cash this?" Noah tilted his head slightly, his expression calm. "Trying to deposit it, actually." Stephen glanced down at the paper again, clearing his throat. "We have certain procedures for transactions like this. Large amounts require extra verification." Noah's lips curled slightly, but his voice remained polite. "Is that so?" "Because I watched the gentleman before me deposit an even larger amount. No ID check, no waiting, no security guard hovering over him." Angela shifted uncomfortably. Stephen ignored her. "That's different." Noah's eyebrow raised slightly. "Is it?" Stephen's posture stiffened. His fingers tapped once against the counter. "We just have to follow protocol. I'm sure you understand." Noah studied him for a long moment. Then very slowly, he smiled. "Oh, I understand perfectly." Stephen forced a chuckle, though his jaw twitched. "Good. Then you won't mind waiting while we complete our verification." Noah exhaled through his nose, his patience stretching thin. He glanced at the security guard, then back at Stephen. "Take all the time you need. I have nowhere else to be." He leaned casually against the counter, but his eyes remained sharp. The room had grown quieter, the tension settling like an invisible weight over everyone. Stephen turned and walked away, heading toward another office. Angela hesitated, then followed. The security guard didn't move, still standing a little too close. Noah barely acknowledged any of them. He was waiting for exactly what he knew was coming next. Noah remained where he was, his fingers lightly drumming against the counter. His patience was unshaken, but he had been in enough rooms like this to know what was happening. The hesitation, the unnecessary delay, the hushed whispers. This wasn't about a check. It never was. Behind him, customers moved about the bank, unaware of the slow-building tension at the counter. A man in a sharp navy suit stepped up to the teller beside Noah, placing his check on the counter with an easy smile. The young teller, barely out of college, took one glance at it and began processing it immediately. No questions, no hesitation. Noah let out a slow breath through his nose, shaking his head slightly. He wasn't surprised. Meanwhile, Stephen entered his office, shutting the door behind him with just a little too much force. Angela hovered near the entrance, fidgeting as she watched him lower himself into his chair. Stephen rubbed a hand over his face before reaching for his phone. "I don't like this," he muttered under his breath. Angela frowned. "Sir, what's wrong?" Stephen didn't look up. He was staring at the check on his desk, his own signature printed in ink. The problem wasn't the check. The problem was who had handed it to him. "I need to verify something," Stephen said, his voice tight. He tapped the screen of his phone and brought it to his ear. The line rang twice before a familiar voice picked up. "Mr. Holloway?" Stephen straightened in his chair. "Elaine, can you check something for me? Payroll records for this month. Does the name Noah Carter appear?" A pause. Then Elaine's voice came through, slightly confused. Yes, sir. He's at the top of the list. As always." Stephen felt a muscle twitch in his jaw. "And his position?" Another pause. "Chief Executive Officer of Bennett Financial?" Stephen's heart sank. Elaine hesitated before adding, Is everything okay, sir?" Stephen forced a chuckle that felt thin, even to himself. "Yes, just a routine check. Thanks." He ended the call before she could ask any more questions. Angela was watching him closely now. "What is it?" Stephen exhaled, staring at the check like it was a live grenade. Noah Carter wasn't just a high-value client. He wasn't someone who had wandered into the wrong bank by accident. He owned this bank. Angela leaned in. "Sir?" Stephen blinked, snapping out of his thoughts. He looked at Angela, then at the glass window where Noah still stood, calm and collected, as if he already knew what was happening behind closed doors. Stephen swallowed hard, his mind racing. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a career-ending disaster waiting to unfold. And outside, Noah waited. Because he already knew the moment Stephen stepped back through that door, the real game would begin. Stephen wiped his palms against his slacks, the weight of his mistake pressing down on him like a vice. His mind scrambled for a solution, something, anything that could undo what had already been set into motion. But the problem was, there was no undoing it. The moment Angela flagged Noah's check, the moment she called security, the moment he himself had dismissed him as just another man with no business carrying that much money, they had set the course for disaster. Angela, still oblivious to the storm brewing, shifted in place. "So what should we do?" she asked, her voice carrying a nervous edge. Stephen inhaled sharply and stood, straightening his tie as if fixing his appearance could somehow fix the situation. "We go out there," he said slowly, "and we act like none of this happened." Angela blinked. "Sir, we practically accused him of fraud. Security is watching him like a hawk. He knows what happened." Stephen shot her a sharp look. "Then we fix it before he decides to make a scene." Angela hesitated but nodded, following him as he strode toward the main lobby. Stephen's pace was brisk, purposeful, as if moving quickly enough could make it seem like he was always in control. But as he approached the counter, his stomach twisted. Noah was still there, still waiting. But it wasn't the waiting that unsettled Stephen. It was how calm he looked. Hands in his pockets, shoulders relaxed, not a trace of frustration or impatience on his face. That kind of calm wasn't natural in a situation like this. That was the kind of calm a man had when he knew he had already won. Stephen cleared his throat as he stepped forward, forcing a tight smile. Mr. Carter, I apologize for the delay. Just some routine verifications. Noah tilted his head slightly, his eyes steady. Routine verifications? Stephen nodded quickly. Yes, of course, you understand. With transactions of this size, Noah exhaled softly through his nose, a hint of amusement flickering in his gaze. With transactions of this size, he repeated, except for the gentleman before me. And the one before him, and the one before him. Angela's breath hitched. Stephen's throat went dry, but he forced a chuckle. Well, sometimes, depending on the situation, certain people require extra verification. Noah finished for him. His tone wasn't sharp. It wasn't even confrontational. It was controlled, the way a man with power tested to see how deep someone would dig their own grave. Stephen hesitated, the words failing him. The room was quiet now. Customers had started to notice the shift. Tellers kept their heads down, pretending not to listen. Even the security guard, Tom, had stopped pretending he wasn't watching. Noah let the silence stretch. Then with slow, deliberate ease, he reached forward and tapped the check that was still sitting on the counter. Let's try this again, he said, his voice calm but firm. Deposit my check. Stephen swallowed hard. He knew there was no way out now. With stiff fingers, he reached for the check and handed it to Angela. Process it. Angela hesitated but then turned to her computer, her hands slightly trembling as she typed in the numbers. The transaction went through instantly. The screen flashed, approved in bold green letters. Angela cleared her throat. It's deposited, sir. Noah nodded, slipping his ID back into his wallet. Good. That wasn't so hard, was it? Stephen opened his mouth, maybe to offer another weak apology, but Noah had already turned. His job here wasn't done. It was just beginning. Noah slid his wallet back into his pocket, but he didn't walk away. He could have. His check was deposited, his money was where it belonged, and technically the situation had been resolved. But that wasn't enough. Not after the way they treated him, not after the way they always treated people like him. He turned back to Stephen, his expression still calm, but this time there was something else in his eyes, purpose. Now, Noah said, tilting his head slightly, let's talk about what just happened here. Stephen stiffened. The muscles in his jaw flexed as he struggled to keep his expression neutral. Sir, as I said, it was just a misunderstanding. A simple mistake. A mistake, Noah repeated, letting the words settle between them. You mean like the mistake Angela made when she flagged my check as suspicious? Or the mistake when she called security before she even processed it? Or the mistake when you walked out here and tried to lie to my face? Angela swallowed hard. She took a half step back, as if distance could somehow shield her from the weight of Noah's words. Stephen's throat bobbed. Mr. Carter, we were just... You were just what? Noah cut in, his voice still steady, still measured, but sharp enough that the tension in the room thickened. Following policy? Because I am the policy. I write the policies for this bank, and nowhere in them does it say that black men depositing their own paychecks need to be treated like criminals. Angela's face turned pale. Stephen's fingers twitched at his sides. His brain was scrambling for a way out, but there wasn't one. Noah let his words settle before he continued, his voice lowering slightly. So, tell me, Stephen, what exactly were you doing? Silence. Tom, the security guard, shifted uncomfortably by the door. The other tellers pretended to be busy, but their hands were frozen over their keyboards, their ears tuned into every word. The customers in line weren't even pretending anymore. They were watching. Stephen's breath came out short and shaky. That's what I thought, Noah said, cutting him off before he could grasp at another excuse. Now let me tell you what's going to happen next. Angela flinched. Stephen's entire body went rigid. Noah took a step closer, his tone still calm, still undeniable. You're going to call a meeting with every single employee in this branch. Today, right now, and you're going to explain to them why this, he gestured around the room, will never happen again. Stephen swallowed. Mr. Carter, I don't think... No, you don't think, Noah interrupted, his voice never rising, but hitting like a hammer anyway. That's the problem. And because you don't think, I'm going to do it for you. Stephen opened his mouth, but before he could say anything, Noah reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Or, Noah said, unlocking the screen, I can send a quick message to corporate and have a new branch manager here by the end of the day. Your choice. Angela let out a small gasp. Tom blinked. A murmur rippled through the lobby. Stephen's face lost all color. Wait. Noah raised an eyebrow, his thumb hovering over his screen. Stephen's hands clenched at his sides, his pride battling his survival instincts. Then after a long, painful pause, he exhaled sharply and gave a tight nod. I'll call the meeting, Stephen said, his voice barely above a whisper. Noah slipped his phone back into his pocket. Good. Then with an easy smile, he took a step back. And after that, he added, you and Angela can start clearing out your desks. Stephen's mouth parted slightly, as if his brain had stopped working for a moment. His breath hitched, and his hands twitched by his sides. Angela's reaction was even more visible. Her body jerked slightly, like she had misheard something. Angela's voice cracked. Sir, what do you mean? Noah didn't even look at her. His attention remained fixed on Stephen. You and Angela will no longer be employed at this bank, effective immediately. The weight of those words slammed into them like a sledgehammer. Angela's face drained of color. You can't just... I can, Noah said smoothly. And I am. The room had fallen completely silent now. The only sounds were the distant clicking of keyboards and the soft murmur of the street outside. Every teller, every customer, every single person in the bank was watching. Stephen shook his head quickly, his voice frantic. Wait, hold on. Let's not be hasty. Stephen? Noah's voice was firm, controlled. Do I look like I'm being hasty? Stephen's throat bobbed, and for the first time, he really looked at Noah. Not as a man at his counter, not as a customer who needed to be controlled, but as the one person in this building with more power than anyone else. Noah continued, his tone carrying the weight of finality. I hired you. I trusted you to oversee one of the most profitable branches of this bank. I gave you resources, training, everything you needed to succeed. And what did you do? His gaze flickered to Angela before returning to Stephen. You let this happen, Stephen's breath shuddered. It was a mistake. I didn't know. That's exactly the problem, Noah cut in, shaking his head slightly. You should have known. And if this is how you treat your own CEO, I can only imagine how you treat people who don't have the power to fire you. Angela let out a shaky breath, panic creeping into her voice. Sir, I was just following... Following what? Noah asked, his eyes flicking to her now. Your assumptions? Your bias? The unwritten rules that told you to doubt me the moment I walked in? He let the words settle before adding, You didn't even try to do your job right. Angela was shaking now, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter like it was the only thing holding her up. Stephen, still trying to recover, let out a nervous laugh. Look, we don't have to do this in front of everyone. Let's go to my office. Talk this through. Noah took a step forward, closing the distance just enough to make his point clear. No, Stephen, we do have to do this here. Because when you humiliated me, you didn't pull me aside to talk in private. You did it right here in front of your staff, your customers, your security. Stephen's lips parted, but no words came out. You weren't careful then, Noah said, tilting his head. So why should I be now? Angela was trembling, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Please, she whispered. I have... Save it, Noah said, his voice like ice. You should have thought about that before you treated me like a criminal for trying to deposit my own check. Stephen's eyes darted around the room, as if looking for someone, anyone, to step in, to fix this. But there was no one. He was alone. Noah let the silence stretch for a long, agonizing moment before finally speaking again. Turn in your keys. Security will escort you both out. Stephen sucked in a breath. His voice, for the first time, held something he had never expected to feel when he walked into work that morning. Fear. Angela choked back a sob, her nails digging into her palms. Tom, the security guard, shifted on his feet, his gaze flickering toward Noah for confirmation. Noah gave a slight nod. Tom hesitated for only a second before stepping forward. His expression was unreadable, but there was something almost satisfied about the way he spoke. "You heard him?" Tom said, his voice even. "Let's go." Stephen opened his mouth to argue, but then he saw something in Noah's expression, something unforgiving. This wasn't up for debate. So with slow, defeated movements, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his office keys, setting them gently on the counter. The metal clinked softly against the polished surface. Angela did the same, her hands trembling as she placed her keys next to his. And just like that, it was over. Noah nodded at Tom, who stepped forward to escort them out. Stephen's shoulders sagged as he walked toward the exit, his face pale, his entire world crashing down around him. Angela followed, silent tears streaking her cheeks. No one spoke. No one needed to. The bank had never been this quiet before. The heavy glass doors swung open as Stephen and Angela stepped out, their shoes clicking against the polished floors in slow, defeated steps. The quiet murmur of the bank had transformed into absolute silence. Not a single teller moved. Customers held their breath. The weight of the moment pressed down on every single person in that lobby. Stephen's face was locked in shock, his eyes darting from side to side as if expecting someone to step in, to undo what had just happened. But there was no undoing this. Angela, still trembling, clutched her purse like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Neither of them looked back. Noah remained where he was, standing tall, his hands still in his pockets, watching them go. The sight of them leaving should have felt like victory, but it didn't. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about every person who had ever been treated the way they had treated him today. Tom, the security guard, lingered near the entrance, shifting slightly before turning toward Noah. "Anything else you need, sir?" His voice was different now, no longer sharp and demanding, no longer holding that silent authority he had assumed before knowing who Noah was. Noah glanced at him, his expression unreadable. "That depends," he said simply. "Is there a reason you stepped forward so quickly when Angela called you over?" Tom hesitated. Noah tilted his head slightly. "You didn't even ask me anything. You just moved into position, like you were ready for things to go bad before they ever had a chance to go right." Tom exhaled sharply, looking away for a moment. "It's just procedure, sir." "Procedure," Noah repeated, nodding slowly. "And if I had raised my voice? If I had refused to step away from the counter when Angela asked? If I had told Stephen I wasn't leaving until I got answers?" Tom said nothing. Noah held his gaze, his voice soft but carrying weight. "Would you have put your hands on me?" The question lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating. Tom's shoulders stiffened. His fingers flexed at his sides, and for the first time, he truly thought about what he would have done if things had gone differently. If he hadn't known Noah's name. If he hadn't been told in the last few minutes that the man in front of him wasn't just another customer. The answer sat between them, unspoken but loud. Noah didn't push it further. He let the question hang, let Tom sit with it, let the room itself breathe in the discomfort. Because discomfort meant realization. And realization, that meant change was possible. Noah exhaled slowly and turned back to the counter. Angela was gone, but the young teller, Melissa, was still sitting there wide-eyed, her fingers hovering over her keyboard like she wasn't sure if she was supposed to move. "Do me a favor," Noah said, his voice lighter now, the storm settling but not gone. Melissa flinched. Yes, sir?" Noah slid a business card across the counter. "Call HR. Let them know there are 2 positions that need to be filled." Melissa nodded quickly, swallowing hard. "Right away, sir." Noah turned, finally stepping away from the counter, walking slowly through the hush bank. As he passed, employees stiffened, some shifting awkwardly in their seats, some dropping their eyes to their desks. Others, mostly the ones who had been watching everything unfold, held their gaze, nodding slightly as he walked by. Noah stopped near the waiting area, where a woman in her 40s sat with her teenage son. She had been there the entire time, watching closely, her hand resting protectively on her son's knee, like she had been silently teaching him a lesson without speaking a single word. The young boy, no older than 15, was staring at Noah like he had just witnessed something life-changing. Noah met his eyes and gave him a small nod. "What's your name?" The boy straightened a little. "Jordan." "Jordan?" Noah repeated, slipping his hands into his pockets. "You looking for a job?" Jordan blinked in surprise. His mother looked up, startled. "He's still in high school," she said carefully. Noah smiled. "That's fine. We have internship programs, summer training, a few hours after school if you are interested." Jordan's eyes widened slightly. He glanced at his mother, who studied Noah for a long moment before nodding. Jordan swallowed and sat up straighter. "Yeah, I'd like that." Noah reached into his pocket and handed him a second business card. "Come by on Monday, let's talk." The boy took the card like it was something sacred. His mother squeezed his knee, pride swelling in her eyes. Noah gave them both a small smile before turning and heading for the exit. As he stepped through the doors, the cold afternoon air hit his face, but it felt different, lighter. Behind him, the bank would return to business as usual. People would move forward, transactions would continue, and the world would keep turning. But some things would never be the same. Not for Stephen, not for Angela, not for the customers who had seen everything, not for Jordan, and certainly not for the bank that had, for far too long, operated under the assumption that power belonged to the people who looked the part. Noah had just reminded them that power didn't have a look. It had a name, and today that name had changed everything. Noah walked down the sidewalk, the weight of the moment settling over him like a quiet storm. The city moved around him, indifferent to what had just happened inside that bank. Cars hummed past, horns blared in the distance, and pedestrians bustled along the busy streets, caught up in their own lives. But for the people inside that building, everything had changed. He could feel it, the shift in the air, the way the employees had looked at him differently as he left. Some had seemed nervous, others ashamed, and a few had held their heads a little higher, like they had just witnessed something they never thought they'd see. The truth was, today wasn't just about him. It was about every single person who had ever walked into a bank, a store, a meeting, or an office and been treated like they didn't belong. It was about all the moments where people like Stephen and Angela had looked at someone who didn't fit their expectations and decided in an instant that they weren't worthy of respect. Today, Noah had reminded them that respect wasn't optional, it was owed. A gust of wind picked up, rustling his jacket as he reached his car, a sleek black sedan parked a block away. As he unlocked the door, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and smirked. It was an email from corporate. Noah leaned against the car, opening the message. Subject, urgent update, Bennett financial incident. Mr. Carter, we've just been informed about an incident at one of our branches involving Stephen Holloway and Angela Whitmore. Several employees, as well as customers, have already reached out with concerns about the situation. Security footage has also been flagged. We would appreciate your guidance on how you'd like to proceed. A public statement may be necessary. Please advise. Best, Elaine Torres, head of corporate operations. Noah chuckled softly. They were already scrambling. Good. He took a slow breath, then started typing his response. Subject. Urgent update. Bennett financial incident. Elaine, no need for a drawn-out review. Stephen and Angela's terminations will remain in place, effective immediately. Additionally, I want a full internal audit on all customer complaints and racial bias incidents over the past 5 years. If any patterns emerge, I want names. Regarding the public statement, we're not just making one. We're setting a new precedent. I want a policy overhaul on how discrimination cases are handled at all Bennett financial branches. This will be the start of a much larger conversation. Have a draft on my desk by morning. Regards, Noah Carter, CEO. Bennett Financial. He hit send and slipped his phone back into his pocket. This wasn't just about two bad employees. That was the mistake companies always made, acting like the problem was just a few bad apples when the entire tree had roots that were rotting. Noah wasn't interested in playing that game. He was going to tear the whole damn tree down if he had to. As he opened his car door, another voice called out, "Noah!" He turned to see an older man, tall with salt and pepper hair, striding toward him. His charcoal suit was crisp, expensive, executive level. His expression was unreadable, but the way he walked, the familiarity in his movements, told Noah exactly who he was. James Russell, chairman of Bennett Financial. Noah leaned against the open car door, arching an eyebrow. James! James stopped a few feet away, tucking his hands into his pockets, studying him. Hell of a way to make a statement, Noah smirked. You know me, I don't believe in subtlety. James exhaled through his nose, nodding slowly. Word traveled fast. Corporate called me. Board members are already asking questions. Good, Noah said, unfazed. Maybe now they'll start asking the right ones. James tilted his head, watching him closely. You know this is going to get attention. I'm counting on it. James hesitated, his jaw tightening slightly. Noah, I don't disagree with what you did, but I've been in this business long enough to know how these things play out. Banks don't like disruption, and neither do the people who run them. Noah gave him a slow, knowing smile. Then maybe they should learn to adjust. James let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. Damn, you really don't let up, do you? Noah pushed off the car, his expression unreadable. If I let up, I wouldn't be standing here. James studied him for another long moment, then nodded. All right, I'll do what I can to smooth things over with the board, but you'd better be ready for the fight that's coming. Noah's smirk widened. James, I was born ready. Without another word, James turned and walked back toward his own car. Noah watched him go before finally sliding into the driver's seat. He didn't just want a policy change. He didn't want empty apologies or performative diversity training sessions. He wanted real consequences for people like Stephen and Angela. Real changes in how how all customers were treated. And this was just the beginning. Noah tapped his fingers against the steering wheel, letting the weight of the conversation settle in. He had expected pushback. He had expected whispers behind closed doors. What he hadn't expected, at least not this quickly, was for James to personally come find him. That meant one thing. The board was already nervous. Good. He didn't waste another second. He started the car, pulled out onto the main road, and headed toward Bennett Financial's headquarters. The ride through the city was smooth, but his thoughts weren't. He had built this company from the ground up, poured everything he had into making it one of the most successful banking firms in the country. He hadn't inherited wealth, hadn't been born into a family of connections. He had earned everything. And yet today had been a reminder that no matter how high he climbed, there were still people who saw him as less. That was fine, because after today, they would never forget his name. The towering glass building of Bennett Financial came into view. As he pulled into the underground parking garage, he barely had time to kill the engine before his phone vibrated again. He glanced at the screen. Elaine Torres, he answered. Talk to me. Elaine, the head of corporate operations, wasted no time. Noah, I just got off the phone with 3 different board members. They're concerned. Noah smirked. They should be. Elaine sighed. Look, I agree with you. What happened today? Unacceptable. But the board doesn't like surprises. They don't like controversy. And this is about to be a media storm. Noah leaned back in his seat, unbothered. You think I don't know that? Then tell me you have a plan. Elaine pushed. Noah exhaled. It's simple. We stop pretending like this was a one-time mistake. Elaine hesitated. What do you mean? Noah's voice was calm, but the edge was undeniable. This isn't about 2 people losing their jobs. This is about an entire system that allows people like Stephen and Angela to feel comfortable treating customers like second-class citizens. We're not issuing a simple apology. We're not reviewing policies just to make the board feel better. We're making real, permanent changes. Elaine was silent for a long moment. You know they're not going to like that? Noah chuckled darkly. I don't need them to like it. I need them to fall in line. A beat of silence. Then Elaine let out a quiet laugh. I hope you know what you're doing. I always do. He hung up. The boardroom showdown. The elevator ride to the top floor was quiet, but Noah could feel the tension brewing before the doors even slid open. As he stepped into the long, sleek corridor leading to the executive conference room, eyes followed him, some filled with curiosity, others with unease. Inside, the boardroom was already full. 10 board members sat around a gleaming mahogany table, their expressions tight, their postures stiff. James was there, sitting at the head, his fingers laced together. He gave Noah a knowing look. Noah didn't bother sitting. He strode toward the center of the room, unbuttoned his blazer, and placed his hands flat on the table. "So," he said, his voice even, "who wants to start?" A woman near the far end, Margaret Dorsey, one of the senior board members, cleared her throat. "Noah, we've been hearing concerns." Noah arched an eyebrow. "Concerns?" Margaret shifted in her seat. "Yes, the way you handled the situation today was necessary," Noah finished for her. Margaret frowned. "That's debatable." Noah let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "No, Margaret, it's not. What's debatable is whether this company is finally going to stop sweeping things under the rug and act like it gives a damn about its customers, about its employees, about its values." A man across the table, Victor Langston, adjusted his cufflinks. "Noah, let's be reasonable. We all agree discrimination is unacceptable, but the way you went about this, firing employees on the spot, publicly calling them out, it's bad optics." Noah's jaw clenched. "You think this is bad optics?" He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone and tapped the screen a few times. "Take a look at this." He turned the phone around, pressing play on a video. The footage was security camera footage from earlier that day. Angela's dismissive tone. The way she barely glanced at his check before deciding something was off. The moment she called security before even processing his transaction. The way Stephen had walked out, already assuming Noah was in the wrong. And then, the shift, the realization that they had just tried to throw out their own CEO. The room was dead silent. Noah let the video play out, let the final damning seconds settle into their heads before he spoke again. "That's bad optics," he said coolly. Margaret's face was pale. Victor looked like he had swallowed glass. Even James, who had been mostly quiet, exhaled heavily, rubbing his temple. Noah turned off the video and slipped his phone back into his pocket. "Now, if any of you want to keep pretending this isn't a problem, be my guest. But know this, if I walk out of here today without a plan in place, that video, it goes public." Margaret stiffened. "Noah, that would be necessary," he interrupted again. His voice was steady, unwavering. "Because if we don't fix this, if we don't take real action, someone else will. The media, the public, our competitors, they'll take this and run with it. And when they do," his eyes narrowed slightly, "you won't be worrying about bad optics anymore. You'll be worrying about a collapse." James exhaled and finally spoke. "What do you propose?" Noah didn't hesitate. "A full company-wide audit. Every single branch, every manager, every teller, every hiring practice we've used in the last 5 years. Any discrimination complaints that were ignored, they're getting reopened. Any patterns in loan denials, account closures, or biased transaction holds, we're investigating them." The room was stiff with tension. Victor shook his head. "That's extreme." Noah's gaze didn't waver. "Number, what's extreme is assuming people like me are criminals the second we step into a bank. What's extreme is people like Angela and Stephen thinking they can get away with it. What's extreme," he said, his voice razor sharp, "is the idea that we should care more about keeping this quiet than actually fixing the problem." Another long, suffocating silence. Then slowly, James nodded. "He's right," Margaret flinched. "James?" "He's right," James repeated, more firmly this time. "We can either act now, or we can wait until we're forced to act." Victor sighed, running a hand down his face. "This is going to be a mess." Noah smirked. "It was already a mess. Now we're just cleaning it up." James exhaled and leaned back. "All right, let's do it." Noah nodded, stepping back. "Good choice." And just like that, the game had changed. The tension in the boardroom hadn't eased. Even after James agreed to the audit, even after Noah had made it very clear that this wasn't optional, the discomfort was still thick in the air. Some of the board members looked like they had just witnessed the fall of an empire. Others, like James, looked resigned, accepting the inevitable. Noah had been in rooms like this before, rooms where change wasn't welcome unless it was convenient, rooms where power didn't shift unless someone forced it to. That's exactly what he was doing now. Margaret pressed her lips together, still visibly uneasy. Noah, I understand your position, and I agree that changes need to be made. But we have to be strategic about this. If we announce a company-wide investigation into racial bias, what do you think will happen? The media will eat us alive. Customers will lose trust. Investors will do exactly what they always do. Noah interrupted. They'll adapt. Victor scoffed under his breath. That's a gamble. Noah turned his gaze to him, sharp and unreadable. So is letting this slide. Victor sat back, folding his arms, but he didn't argue. Noah continued, his voice even. The public doesn't trust companies that hide their mess. They trust companies that own it and fix it. The moment we make this official, we control the narrative. If we try to bury it, all it takes is one viral story, one bad headline, and suddenly we're scrambling on the defensive. This is the only way forward. James exhaled, rubbing his chin. How do you want to handle the rollout? Noah didn't hesitate. First, we make an internal announcement to all employees. No vague corporate speak. We tell them the truth. Bennett Financial has failed in addressing racial bias, and we're taking real steps to fix it. Any employee with past discrimination complaints that were ignored will be given a direct line to HR. Any manager who tries to silence them will be terminated. Victor's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. Margaret's brows pulled together. And externally? Noah's lips pressed into a thin line. A public statement? Within 48 hours. We don't wait until people start asking questions. We get ahead of it. We admit what happened at the branch today, and we outline exactly what we're doing to prevent it from happening again. And then, his eyes flickered across the table. We let people hold us accountable. Silence. The idea of inviting public accountability had some of the board members looking like they had swallowed knives. Noah smirked. Uncomfortable? Good. That means it's working. Margaret sighed, pushing back in her chair. This is going to be a long, messy process. Noah met her gaze. Change always is. The fallout begins. By the time Noah left the boardroom, the ripple effect had already begun. James stayed behind to smooth things over. But Noah knew the real work had just started. As he walked through the sleek corridors of Bennett Financial's headquarters, heads turned. Employees who normally nodded politely and looked away now held his gaze longer, watching him differently, some with curiosity, some with admiration, some with thinly veiled resentment. Noah didn't care. He stepped into his office, tossing his phone onto his desk as he loosened his tie. The floor-to-ceiling windows behind him overlooked the city skyline. But his mind was already ahead, on the next steps. A soft knock at the door made him glance up. Elaine stepped inside, closing it behind her. You really shook things up in there, she said, crossing her arms. Noah exhaled, leaning against his desk. Good. They needed it. Elaine studied him for a long moment before speaking. You know this isn't over, right? The board might have agreed, but not all of them are on your side. Some of them will fight this. Noah smirked. Let them. Elaine shook her head. You've got enemies now, Noah. Not just the board. Investors, clients, people who don't want to see things change. Noah's smirk didn't fade. Then they should buckle up, because this train is already moving. Elaine sighed but nodded. I'll draft the internal memo. You'll have it by the end of the day. Good, Noah said. She hesitated for a second. And the public statement? Noah's expression darkened slightly. I'll write that one myself. Elaine studied him again, then gave a small nod before turning to leave. The moment she was gone, Noah grabbed his phone. He already knew the media would get wind of this. It was just a matter of time. But he wasn't going to wait. He opened his contacts and scrolled until he found the name he was looking for. A journalist. Someone who had been calling for banking reform for years. Someone who had been waiting for a story like this. Noah wasn't just going to clean up Bennett Financial. He was going to force the entire industry to change. With a smirk, he pressed dial. Noah leaned back in his chair, the phone pressed against his ear. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Carter? The voice greeted, his tone a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. Didn't expect a call from you today. What's the occasion? Noah smirked. Got a story for you, Harris. Julian Harris, investigative journalist, known for exposing corporate corruption, dragging billion-dollar companies into the light and asking the kinds of questions CEOs like to avoid. There was a pause before Julian spoke again. Go on. You've been talking about racial bias in the banking industry for a while now, Noah said, his voice calm but deliberate. And I think you'll be very interested in what happened at my company today. Julian let out a slow chuckle. Let me guess. You want to get ahead of the media storm? Noah's smirk didn't fade. I want to start it myself. Another pause. Then Julian's voice lowered slightly. What are you offering? Noah glanced at the security footage still playing on his computer screen. A first-hand account. The CEO of Bennett Financial walks into his own branch, tries to deposit a check, and gets treated like a criminal. Tossed aside, profiled, humiliated. He let the words settle before adding, by his own employees. Julian sucked in a breath. Jesus. And let me guess, the employees in question didn't make it through the day? Noah chuckled darkly. Not even past lunch. Julian was silent for a moment, then his voice turned serious. This is huge, Noah. If you're really going public with this, you know what it means, right? This isn't just about your company. This is about every major bank in the country. They'll come for you. They'll try to silence you. Noah exhaled, running a hand down his face. They can try. Julian let out a low whistle. You always were bold. All right, let's do this. I need an official statement, footage, anything you can provide. If we're blowing the lid off this, we're going all the way. Noah's grip tightened around the phone. You'll have everything by tonight. Then consider your story told, Julian said before hanging up. Noah placed the phone down and exhaled. It had begun. This wasn't about optics. It wasn't about fixing one bad branch. This was about tearing open the entire system and exposing it for what it really was. He wasn't going to give people like Stephen and Angela the luxury of being forgotten. They had made their choices. Now the world was going to see what happened next. Noah didn't waste another second. He turned back to his computer, opening an encrypted file and pulling up the unedited security footage from earlier that day. He trimmed it down, removing unnecessary pauses, but left every incriminating moment intact. The way Angela barely glanced at his check before calling security. The moment Stephen walked out, already deciding Noah wasn't worth listening to. It was all there. With a few clicks, he uploaded the files into a secure folder and drafted a quick email to Julian. Subject, exclusive footage and statement. Bennett Financial Incident. Harris, as promised, attached are the security tapes in my official statement. No spin, no PR fluff, just the truth. This isn't just about me. It's about every black man, woman, and family who walks into a bank and is seen as a suspect before a customer. I'm not just asking for accountability. I'm demanding it. Let's get to work. Noah Carter, CEO, Bennett Financial, he hit send. And just like that, the storm was officially out of his hands. As he leaned back, his phone vibrated again. This time it was a different name flashing across the screen. Miles Donovan, Bennett Financial's top investor, a man with millions tied into the company. Someone who had the power to shake the very foundation of the board. Noah exhaled, already knowing how this conversation was going to go. He answered, Miles. The voice on the other end was clipped. Noah, what the hell is going on? I just got a call from the board. They're saying you're launching a public investigation, that you fired one of the top branch managers on the spot, and now I hear you're handing out footage to the media? Noah didn't flinch. That's correct. Miles let out a harsh breath. Noah, this isn't how you handle things. You don't just air the company's dirty laundry for the world to see. Noah's jaw tightened. No, Miles. That's exactly how you handle things when you actually want change. Miles scoffed. And what about the investors, huh? What about the people who have their money tied into this company? You think they'll be happy when the stock drops because of bad press? Noah's voice remained steady. I think they'll be happy when they realize they're backing a bank that doesn't tolerate racism. Don't be naive, Miles snapped. This isn't about morality, it's about business. And right now, you're making a lot of powerful people nervous. Noah's smirk returned. Good. Miles was silent for a moment, like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. You really think you can survive this? Noah leaned forward, his voice quiet but unshakable. I don't think, Miles. I know. Another beat of silence. Then Miles let out a low, reluctant chuckle. You've got some balls, Carter. I'll give you that. Noah didn't respond. He didn't have to. Miles sighed. All right, I'll keep the other investors from panicking. For now. But you better hope this works, because if it doesn't, you'll be the one they come for. Noah's smirk didn't fade. Let them try. Miles exhaled sharply. You're impossible. I know. The call ended. Noah set his phone down, staring out at the skyline. The fight had officially begun. The board was watching. Investors were waiting. The media was already getting ready to run the story. And Noah, he was ready for war. Noah sat in his office, his fingers pressed together, his mind razor-sharp as he processed what had just happened. Miles had tried to shake him, to remind him of the invisible chains that came with power, the ones that kept men like him in check, that whispered warnings in the ears of black CEOs. Don't step too far. Don't make too much noise. Don't challenge the system that lets you in. But Noah had never played by those rules. The game had changed the moment Angela refused his check. The moment Stephen assumed the worst. The moment security was called before anyone even tried to verify the truth. That wasn't just a fluke. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was systemic. And Noah was about to rip the system apart. His phone buzzed again. Another email, this time from Julian Harris. Subject: This is going to be big, Carter. Just reviewed everything. You weren't kidding. This footage? It's damning. I've already got my editors preparing a front-page feature. This story's going to make waves. But you need to be ready. Once this drops, you won't just have banks coming after you. Politicians, lobbyists, every corporate executive with a vested interest in keeping things the way they are. They'll all be watching. If you're not prepared for that heat, now's the time to back down. Let me know if you want me to hold the story for a few more days. Noah smirked. Hold the story? Not a chance. His fingers moved across the keyboard as he typed back. Subject: Release it. Harris, no delays. No hesitations. Drop the story tomorrow morning. Let the world see it for what it is. If they come for me, let them. I'm not hiding. Noah. He hit send. A slow breath left his chest as he leaned back in his chair, staring out at the city skyline. This wasn't about damage control. It wasn't about containing the fallout. This was about forcing the conversation to happen, on his terms. The industry was built on silent discrimination, on redlining, on predatory lending, on treating certain customers as risks before they were even given a chance. Noah wasn't going to fix one branch. He was about to set fire to the whole damn thing. Morning came fast. The city awoke as it always did. Fast-paced, unforgiving, unaware of the storm about to hit. Noah was already up before dawn, sipping black coffee in his penthouse apartment, his laptop open in front of him. He had barely slept. Not because of nerves, but because of preparation. He knew the moment Julian's story dropped, the phone calls would start, the boardroom meetings, the investor panic, the media firestorm, and he was ready. A sharp ping broke the silence. His email. Julian had published the article. He clicked the link. Front page. Discrimination at the highest level, how Bennett Financial's own CEO was racially profiled at his own bank. Noah scrolled, his eyes scanning the words. Julian had kept it raw. No soft edits, no corporate-friendly language. Detailed breakdown of the footage, direct quotes from Noah, historical context of racial bias in banking, interviews from customers who had experienced similar discrimination. It wasn't just a headline, it was an exposé. Noah's phone vibrated violently against the counter. A flood of notifications, texts, emails. The fallout had begun. He grabbed the phone. First call, James Russell. Noah answered. Morning, James. James's voice was strained. Noah, what the hell have you done? Noah sipped his coffee, unfazed. You read the article? You know I did, James snapped. My phone hasn't stopped ringing since 5 a.m. The board is losing their minds. Investors are panicking, Noah finished smoothly. Good. That means they finally understand how serious this is. James groaned. You don't get it, Noah. This isn't just a PR nightmare. This could tank the company. Noah's expression didn't change. If holding people accountable tanks the company, then it was never strong to begin with. Silence. James sighed heavily. You're really going to do this, aren't you? Noah set his coffee down, leaning against the counter. James, you and I both know this isn't just about one bad experience. This is about an industry that's been built to keep people like me at a disadvantage. If we don't clean house, someone else will do it for us. And when they do, he let the question hang before finishing. We'll all burn with it. James exhaled, his voice quieter now. The board wants an emergency meeting. Today, investors will be there too. They want an explanation. Noah smiled slightly. Perfect. I was hoping we'd get to do this face to face. James muttered something under his breath. You don't make anything easy, do you? Not when it comes to doing the right thing, Noah said. James was silent for a moment, then sighed again. Fine. Meeting's at noon. Be ready. Noah ended the call and turned back to his laptop. He clicked on the comment section of the article. Thousands of responses were already pouring in. Some people were outraged on his behalf. Others were calling for boycotts. A few were defending the bank, saying it was an overreaction. But then he saw them. Stories. Hundreds of people sharing their own experiences. This happened to me last year at a different bank. They made me wait an hour just to verify my identity, even though I had all my documents. I closed my account the next day. My father tried to get a loan at Bennett Financial. He had better credit than my white coworker, who got approved instantly. My dad got denied. I work at a different bank, and trust me, what happened to Noah happens every day. Noah exhaled, his jaw tightening. This wasn't about him anymore. This was bigger, deeper. This was about fixing a system that had been rigged for generations. Noon couldn't come fast enough. Because when he walked into that boardroom today, he wasn't asking for permission. He was making it clear. Change wasn't coming. Change was already here. Noah arrived at Bennett Financial's headquarters just before noon. The building, a towering structure of glass and steel, looked the same as it had every other day. But today, something was different. The moment he stepped inside, he could feel it. The weight of the story. The energy of people who had just realized that the ground beneath them was shifting. Employees who normally greeted him with polite smiles now avoided eye contact. Others, especially the ones who had seen what happened at the bank firsthand, held his gaze a little longer, some with quiet respect, others with uncertainty. As he strode toward the boardroom, his assistant, Claire, fell into step beside him. The board's already inside, she whispered. So are some of the top investors. They're not happy. Noah smirked. They'll live. Claire hesitated. Are you sure about this? Noah stopped walking. He turned to face her fully, his expression calm but unshakable. Claire, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt out of place in a room? Like no matter how much you achieved, no matter how qualified you were, people still questioned if you belonged? Claire swallowed, nodding slightly. Then you already know why I'm doing this, Noah said. This isn't about one bad experience. This is about all of them. And if it makes them uncomfortable, he smirked again, then they're finally feeling what we feel every day. Claire exhaled, then nodded firmly. All right, let's make history. Noah turned back toward the boardroom and pushed open the doors. The final battle. The room was full. Every seat at the long mahogany table was occupied, with more people standing along the walls. Some were executives, others were high-profile investors, and then there were the board members, the ones who still thought they controlled the narrative. James Russell sat at the head of the table, his hands clasped together, his expression unreadable. The moment Noah stepped inside, all conversation stopped. All eyes turned to him. He closed the door behind him and strode to the front of the room, his presence commanding, without him needing to say a word. James cleared his throat. Let's begin. I think we all know why we're here. Victor Langston, one of the board's oldest members, leaned forward, his fingers tapping impatiently against the table. Yes, let's. Carter, would you care to explain why you've single-handedly set fire to this company's reputation? Noah smiled. Sure. Let's start with a simple question. How many of you read the article? Silence. Then slowly, hands began to rise around the room. Noah nodded. Good. Then you know exactly what happened. You saw the footage. You read the statements. Now let me ask you this. How many of you actually think what happened at that branch was acceptable? No hands. Not one. Noah tilted his head. Interesting, because when it was happening in real time, no one seemed to have a problem with it. When it was just another black man being denied basic service, no one in this room cared. Victor scoffed. That's not what this is about, Carter. The issue isn't the incident itself. It's how you handled it. Firing employees on the spot, leaking footage to the press. Do you even understand the damage you've done to this bank's credibility? Noah's smile didn't waver. The only thing that damaged this bank's credibility was allowing this kind of discrimination to happen in the first place. A murmur rippled through the room. Margaret Dorsey leaned forward. Noah, no one here is saying what happened to you was right, but you've put us in a position where the company is now facing backlash. Scrutiny. Good, Noah said simply. It's about time. James finally spoke. The stock took a hit this morning? Noah shrugged. It'll recover. James sighed. And if it doesn't? Noah's expression hardened. Then that says more about the people pulling their money than it does about us doing the right thing. Another silence. Margaret shook her head. You can't run a company on morality alone. Noah leaned forward, his voice dropping slightly. And you can't build one on silence. Not anymore. Victor exhaled sharply. So what's your solution? We can't go back in time. The damage is done. The media already has the story. Investors are watching us like hawks. Where do we go from here? Noah straightened. We own this moment. A few skeptical glances were exchanged across the table. Noah continued. We don't apologize for bringing the truth to light. We lead. We make this company the example for the rest of the industry. A full-scale audit on every branch. New mandatory bias training for all employees. Immediate policy changes to protect customers from discrimination. A transparent reporting system, one that actually holds people accountable. Victor scoffed. You think the public will just forget what happened if we slap some policies on it? Noah's gaze was ice. I think the public will trust us more if they see we're actually willing to fix our mistakes. James rubbed his temple. And what about the board, Noah? You've made a lot of enemies today. Noah's smirk returned. Then I guess they should rethink their positions. Another ripple of tension spread through the room. Margaret exhaled. You're serious about this? Noah's eyes locked onto hers. Margaret, I walked into my own bank and got treated like a criminal. I could have let it slide. I could have let them sweep it under the rug, the way they always do, but I didn't. He straightened, his voice unwavering. This isn't just a scandal to me. This is personal. And if that makes people uncomfortable, good, because I've been uncomfortable my entire life. Silence. Then James leaned back in his chair and exhaled. Let's vote. A long pause. Then one by one, hands began to rise. Margaret, James, even Victor, though reluctantly. A majority. Noah nodded. Then let's get to work. As he turned to leave, James called after him. You know this isn't over, right? Noah stopped at the door, glancing over his shoulder. It never is, he said simply. Then he walked out. The headlines would keep coming. The investors would still whisper. The board would still grumble. But the industry had just changed, and they would never go back to how things were. That's the story. What do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like button, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Thanks for watching.